unbelievable. I never get this kind of crowd. Free cells. Before I get started, just a little commercial. Now is the winter time. You're not doing anything. It's a great time to get your tool bag out and clean and sharpen your tools. Now's a great time. And you never know what you can get when you take something like this and you end up with something like this. And you'd be amazed at how well they still work. How well they still work once you clean them up and sharpen them. And that's what you want, is nice sharpened tools. So now's the time to do that.
Peter, what's the best thing to use to clean them? Clean up the rest?
If you have something that's really rusty, if you can take it apart, you try to take it apart for two reasons. One, because you want to just take care of each individual component separately, but secondly, because you want to learn how it works. If you're going to use a tool, you should really learn how it works, and the best way to learn how it works is to take it apart. So when you take it apart, soak all the really rusty pieces in white vinegar. Just like a day or two white vinegar, take a bristle brush, toothbrush, something like that, and the rust will come right off. And then take the opportunity to paint it and everything else. But now's the time to do it. Now's the time to go through your tool bag and go and do that exercise, and at the same time, you make your list, your Mother's Day list, your Father's Day list. Things that I really need.
How do you sharpen them? What do you suggest for sharpening them?
Sharpening. I have a number of things. I have sharpening stones. In my tool bag, I keep a sharpening stone. You can buy that for $1.50 at the hardware store. You can use sandpaper. It depends on the degree. If it's really, really dull and doesn't have an edge at all, like this piece of wall art, then you start with a file or a grinding wheel, and then you go to a stone, and then you go to sandpaper. But this piece of wall art is going to join its little brother in a couple of weeks, and these will end up at the museum. This tool is awesome. This is from the 50s. It's a cultivator, but it's also a weeder. I don't know why they stopped making this tool. This would eliminate so many things in your bag. But this is awesome. These tools are all here for anybody who wants to come up and look at them if you have any questions. Okay, so tonight is not all about my other presentations where we get into details about soil and everything else. This is top-level formulas, specifics, information, things for you to take home and things for you to use. A couple of weeks ago, I was at one of those Asian restaurants, and I got a fortune that said, education and intelligence aren't the same thing. And I thought, that's a lot better than me saying, knowing tomatoes don't go into a fruit salad. So let's talk a little bit about that. If you go online and you look up, just Google, I shouldn't say Google, go online and research most gardener mistakes. There's always 10 of these and 10 of those. There's a bunch of people who listed them, but on every single one of those lists is the same information at the top. Poor plant selection, poor plant location when we take it home, not preparing the soil before we plant. Then once we get it in the ground, we overwater. We abuse fertilizers and pesticides. We forget about the wildlife because we planted in the spring and the woodchucks and rabbits don't come out until a couple months later. So we don't protect the plants that we put in the ground. And then we try to bundle all that up front, and we get exhausted before the gardening season even starts. So those are the top items that I'm going to talk about tonight. Okay? And as usual, if you have a question, yell it out. If it's appropriate for where I'm speaking, I'll answer it. If not, I'll just defer it till later and we'll work it that way. Sound good? Yes.
Are you going to give handouts of the information, or should we take notes?
There was a handout. If you did not receive a handout, are there some in the back? There are some in the back. Oh boy, we'll give you a chance to get all of those. That shows how many non-garden club members are here, so more than half the crowd. Well, welcome. While your hands are up, with the other hand, how many people are not from Burlington? Okay. How many of the people who are not from Burlington are from other garden clubs? And you are from? Wakefield?
Wakefield Backyard Gardeners.
Okay, so you now know that you can schedule me and I'll be happy to come out to Wakefield.
Beverly.
Beverly, okay. That's a little bit of a ride, but you went against the traffic.
Went to dinner with a friend.
There you go. Well, same to you too. Just take my name and I'll send you my flyer. All right, so this is what happens when we plant in the inappropriate location, when we do not prepare the soil, when we put our plants in too close together so that there's competition, we create problems. First, we have to overwater, because being too close together, there is a requirement for more water. The 1 inch per week rule doesn't apply because they're too close together. We fertilize, and sometimes we over-fertilize, which means that we have to put more water in because we have to dilute the salts in the soil, otherwise it'll kill the plant, which guys don't have to raise their hand, but how many of you killed your lawns in the past by over-fertilizing? Too much fertilizer. And we see an insect, and suddenly the whole yard is infested, so we spray everything. And then we start that cycle over, and we repeat it, and we repeat it, and we repeat it. And we end up in what I call a death spiral. Because the more we use chemicals, the more chemicals we have to use. And we need to break that cycle in order to get away from it. I'm not promoting, the green movement and let's all do all that, but I am saying that if you get into this cycle of just using chemicals, you're going to end up using more water and then more chemicals, and more water and more chemicals, and eventually you're not going to be able to sustain a good garden, flowers, vegetables, whatever. So what I promote, and the way I remind people about all of this, is simply that plants have been around for 2 billion years. We have only been cultivating for 10,000 years. So if plants have survived on their own for 1.99999 billion years, then they probably know more about survival than we do. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's start with plant dynamics. Plants are two different systems. There's the shoot system and there's the root system. They are diametrically opposed. The shoot system is responsible for food production and reproduction. The root system is responsible for nutrient harvesting and storage of food. The shoot system has all of its life, its vascular system is right here along the edge. It's less than a 30-second paper, thickness of a piece of paper, all the way around, every single plant. It's just a 32nd of an inch. All of this is dead wood. Remember that TV show on cable, Deadwood? Dead. There's nothing in here. This is all dead wood. This is all dead bark. It's just that little bit of green just underneath the bark that's alive on every single plant. All of the nutrient-rich water goes up the outside. All of the sugar goes down the inside in this little area. Food production. Then at the transition point, the roots, everything changes. This vascular system goes from being on the outside of the plant to being into the center of the root. So it moves to the center. The shoot system inhales carbon dioxide, exhales oxygen. The root system inhales oxygen, exhales carbon dioxide. Complete opposites, but also a complete system. Sunlight, water, air, temperature drive both systems differently. Sunlight stimulates photosynthesis, the process of making sugar. So H2O goes up, CO2 comes in, a whole mess of them get together, and you end up with glucose. What's the formula? C2H12O, C6H12O6.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the oxygen gets exhaled through the leaves. During the day, while the plant is growing, the shoot system is eating all of that sugar. The excess sugar goes down for storage into the root system. And the root system eats that sugar just to survive because it's the complete opposite system. At night, the shoot system respires. It inhales oxygen, exhales carbon dioxide as it eats the sugar. Because the plant keeps growing at night, there's no sunlight, no photosynthesis, so the only way the plant can keep growing is to feed off of its stored sugar, but it's still feeding. Okay? Temperature drives photosynthesis in terms of maximum performance, maximum capacity. Some plants optimize food production at 60 degrees. Some plants optimize food production at 90 degrees, depending on where they were native. So the plants that optimize photosynthesis, food production in the 60 to 70 degree range are what we refer to as what? Something season plants. Cool season plants. Plants that optimize photosynthesis in the 80s and 90 degree temperature range are called warm season plants. It's all temperature driven. Temperature also affects the root system two ways. First of all, the sunlight heats the soil. That wakes up the microbes that we're going to be talking about a little bit later, but it also, the heat initiates seed germination. So if you have seed in the ground and the seed gets wet, it will begin to germinate. But if it is a warm season plant and the soil is too cold for that warm season plant, what will happen to that seed? It dies in the ground. Inside the seed is a baby plant. Everybody go home tonight, take one bean. Joe, you take one of your big Cascade beans, put it in the water, leave it soaking overnight, cut the seed coat off tomorrow, open it up, and you'll see a baby bean plant. You'll see the leaves, you'll see the root, you'll see the whole plant inside the seed. If you have seed trying to germinate when the soil is too cold, it's just like that baby plant inside that seed is just like you going outside tonight with no t-shirt on, right? And that's why it dies. So when you are growing in the garden, you're actually looking at when you think sunlight, water, air, temperature, you actually have to recognize that there are two things going on. So you can't just solve a plant problem by looking at what's going on above ground. Got that?
Yep.
We're good?
Yep.
All right, I'm going to migrate over now. That's it for plants. Wait a minute, I'll come back. You see this piece where the trunk is flaring out? All right, that has a technical name called a trunk flare.
Very good.
When you're mulching, we'll talk about toward the end of tonight, when you're mulching around a tree, you should always see the trunk flare. The mulch should not go above the trunk flare. If you see this, right? If you see that, that's not good. They call those tree volcanoes. The landscapers love to do that because it looks so good. You have this tree sticking up with this nice cone of mulch around it. You're suffocating the tree. You're doing damage to the tree. And by covering all of this up, see all these cracks and everything in the bark? Covering all of that up with all that mulch, inside, where all these cracks are, heats up really nice. It gets moist and humid and warm, and that's where all your diseases and insects hang out. So you never want to create tree volcanoes. All right? Come back to that later. I'm using my cheat sheet also. What I missed, and we'll talk about this when we get to each subject, but fertilizer abuse. I had 20%. That was a few years ago. Now, the latest figures from the WHO, World Health Organization, is that between Canada and the United States combined, we use 12% of the world's supply of fertilizer. We've been usurped by China and India and a whole mess of smaller countries in arid regions. You know, sandy deserts where you really shouldn't be growing anything.
Right.
Well, the only way they can grow things is to over-fertilize, fertilize. So we've been usurped, which is great. That just continues to make us look better as far as being green. So we're down to 12%. But we still use so much that we have to import it. And there's really no reason for that. Okay? I've been using this prop for about 12 years. This is a cubic foot. So when you talk about a cubic foot, I want you to visualize what it is. All right? 12 inches by 12 inches by 12 inches. Cubic foot. This is what your plants grow in, soil. And in a healthy soil, there are 200 trillion microbes. That's everything from tiny little bacteria all the way up to worms and everything, although worm's not a microbe. Little bugs and worms and everything. 200 trillion. Think about that. What's that, something like, how many times our debt? 8 times our debt? National debt? 50,000 different species of microbes. The ratio of good microbes to bad microbes is 30,000 to 1. In a healthy soil, with a healthy plant, you do not have to do anything in your garden other than water it and pick the flowers and vegetables. The plant is capable of sustaining itself. It has its own IFF, identification friend or foe. It has its own pesticides. It has all the things necessary to protect itself. It doesn't need us. Go back 1.99999 billion years of surviving without us. The microbes break down the organic matter that's in the soil to its nutrient level, elements, and that feeds the plant. So the microbes feed the plant. The microbes take care of the plant. What you're trying to create in the soil are these little lumps. These are blown up, obviously. These are aggregates. You're trying to create a situation where you have a lot of inorganic material, which is where your elements are located. These are your rocks and everything. Sand, silt, and clay, right? And organic matter. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the combination of water in this, sand, silt, and clay mixed with organic matter, binds all of these things together. So you end up with these little aggregates. And the aggregates don't nest very well. So what you have is a ton of air inside between all of these aggregates. And remember what I said about the root system? It's the opposite of the shoots. It inhales oxygen. So you need oxygen in the soil. The way to get the oxygen in the soil is to have a lot of organic matter and combining it with water, you create these aggregates. So this is what you're trying to create in the soil.
Want to pass one on the other side?
Hmm?
Want to pass one on the other side?
No, pass them around. When it gets to the end, just put it on the table. Thank you. It is so important to amend the soil with as much organic matter as you can. So how much is that? Well, in 1918, this author said, to prepare the home garden to yield big crops of vegetables, a wheelbarrow load of manure to every 2 square yards of ground is not too much. A wheelbarrow is not too much. In 1967, this author said, they also feed the growing and crawling life in the soil, the bacteria, fungi, earthworms, and myriads of other organisms that digest the organic materials, enrich the soil with stable humus, build soil structure, going around, and counteract bacteria and fungicidal diseases and even some pests. Out of all of life's processes, the available nutrient elements in the soil originate. The living soil feeds the plant. Living soil feeds the plant. I got a million of these. 1961. You have to go to the used bookstore on Tuesdays. 10 for a buck. 1961. Organic matter is a soil conditioner which can be matched by no other material. When it can be had practically free, as making compost, hint, hint, from home compost pile, it is sheer folly to let it go to waste. Humus is the storehouse of plant foods, and along with absorption by the bacteria and fungi, prevents the loss of nutrients if they are not used by plants immediately. In other words, they hold on to it. So the more organic material that you can put in the soil, the better. Everybody's so quiet. You all Y'all go with that? Any questions? Yeah?
I had a neighbor that was always putting her coffee grounds.
Yep.
Are you a fan of that? I throw all mine out.
Your neighbor uses coffee grounds. Every morning after breakfast, my mother would take the coffee grounds and she would drop it outside the kitchen window on where there's a rhododendron was growing. So that whole area was just processed coffee grounds. Coffee grounds, any seed, any plant seed, any seed meal is high in nitrogen. So coffee grounds are high in nitrogen. Seed meal is also very acidic. So when you use seed meal, you're going to lower the pH. But yes, that's an excellent conditioner. And in the back of your handout, there's a recipe for homemade organic fertilizer, and that's the main ingredient in this coffee grounds. Because you can go to anywhere in town, anywhere you want, you can get coffee grounds by the bag. Yes?
Birdseed.
Birdseed as a, question of birdseed. Birdseed as a fertilizer?
Oh, the bird eats the seeds out of the shell. The shells are still on the ground.
Yeah, that's all organic material. I wouldn't put it directly in the garden. I would put it into the compost pile to decompose. Anything that's green that you put directly in the garden and use like grass clippings as a mulch is counterproductive to the soil. Which is the microbes, which is the bacteria, in order to break down the grass clippings, needs nitrogen to increase the number of bacteria to eat all of that grass. So it actually takes nitrogen out of the soil and away from your plants, your flowers and vegetables you're trying to grow, to eat the grass. Once the grass breaks down, then the nitrogen level comes back. So you never put fresh grass clippings around your plants. You always compost them first. So I would just compost it. Yes?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of lasagna gardening lately. I don't till at all anymore. What is your thoughts on that?
I actually wrote a column a few years ago, to till and not to till.
Yes.
I live in Burlington.
You till to increase the amount of oxygen that's in the soil. You don't till because within the soil, at each level, there are different types of bacteria, and they colonize. So there's no diversity in the micro sense in the soil. They're all separate colonies. So when you turn the soil, you mix up all the colonies. You're forcing them to get along, which they don't really like and migrate back. But the flip side is you're adding oxygen to the soil. So to me, it's really a question of what you prefer to do. At the community garden and even in my own yard, sometimes I just get so tired that I say to heck with it and I just plant without tilling. And I haven't really seen anything drastically different. I prefer to till. But again, if you have a lot of organic matter already in the soil, you probably can get away with it. But if you don't have a lot of organic material in the soil, you've got to work it in and you have to till. You've got to break it up. Somebody else had a question? Yes?
I'm just curious, for composting, do you prefer compost pile or one of those tumbler bins that you can rotate and get better airflow?
If you are a family of two, you're not generating a lot of compost, raw material, you might get away with a bin. I prefer not to. I'm lazy. So my whole thing with composting is I don't want to do any work. So I have two big compost piles. They're each about 4 feet cubes, so whatever that is times this, 20-something of those. And I just spend all winter and fall filling up one. In the spring I harvest the other one. And then I spend all spring and summer filling that up. In the fall I harvest this one. I go back and forth, but I don't do any work. If you're using a tumbler, you really can't keep throwing things in every single day and expect every single day to get compost out the bottom. It doesn't work that way. You have to fill it up, tumble it for a couple of weeks, harvest it, fill it up again, which means you still need a bucket somewhere for all your daily scraps that you can throw back in there. So, well, if you're going to do that, why don't you just go out to the compost pile? And it's a lot less work.
Can you throw it straight into the flower bed or the garden bed?
In the fall, you can work it all in, turn it all in, and ask the microbes, for the rest of the fall and then into the spring to break it down for you. You can do that.
Well, that's what I've been doing. But
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I had an old Italian guy when I grew up in Revere who every year he would just go all around the neighborhood and grab all the bags of leaves and then bring them back into his yard. And he would put down, that much leaves and then just rototill it all in the fall. He had great tomatoes. Yeah?
You said about leaves and grass clippings. Do you throw all that in your compost pile?
Yes.
For the summer and then the next year?
Yeah. Your question is, do you throw everything in the yard waste, the fall yard waste? Yes, absolutely. What I do with most of the leaves is I compost in place. I take my raspberry beds in the area around the compost bins, and I just lay it down there. It's funny, the leaves will blow right across your yard and everything, but once you rake them and then put them down again, they just sit. They don't move at all. So I take all of that, and I put down about 6 inches of leaves around the raspberries and the compost bins. And when I go out in what are we going to be out in about a month, right? It'll be down and already breaking down. So in a pinch, if I ever need something for the garden, I've got this much of compost just sitting around the compost bin doing nothing. So in a pinch, I got plenty of compost. We good? All right. So let's talk a little bit about water. I said it earlier, we overuse water. Nationally, we double our consumption of water during the growing season. Locally here in Burlington, our daily water use is 2.6 million gallons coming out of the treatment plants. During the summer, it's 5.2 million gallons. So Burlington is just like the rest of the country, right on the average. We double our water consumption during the summer. That is the reason why we have to put watering restrictions in place. It is frustrating for me, and I'm sure for some of you, to drive around town when you know it's odd day and you see sprinkler systems running on even-numbered houses. It's even more frustration to go through the business areas and seeing every single day those sprinklers are running and the same lawns every single day. And that's where most of the waste is, on lawns. And there is just no reason we have to water. There's just no reason whatsoever. The rule of thumb for watering, when you read your planting guides, right? When you read your planting guides, the rule of thumb is 1 inch of water per week. 1 inch. When you water your soil, and this is for the people who do not do a lot of augmentation with manures and compost and things like that, just your typical standard Burlington 4 inches of topsoil over the sand that the developer put down when he first built your house soil. When you put down that 1 inch of water, a third of that water percolates down into the aquifer. So you lose a third of that water immediately. Just percolates down. A third of that water chemically sticks to that sand, silt, and clay that's being passed around. Chemically sticks to it. The rest of the water, capillary water, magnetically sticks to the water molecules that are chemically attached to the rocks. So you have water suspended between in those cavities, in those pieces that are being passed around. You have water suspended. That's capillary water. That is what is available to your plants. And then a third, the last third, is lost to the plant either by runoff or by evaporation. So only a third of what you put when you water in the soil is available to the plant. The way to increase that is to add more organic material. The more organic material you have, the more there is there to absorb the capillary water before it becomes gravitational water and disappears into the aquifer. So you want to put as much organic material. It's like a repetition here. Well, I'm going to keep doing that. But guess what? If you look at this chart that I put in on page, I guess it's still page 2, soil dynamics and water dynamics. If you look at that chart, the City of Boston DPW has a link you can go to, and you can see how much water is falling every single day. And I went back to 2015. We have the average homeowner gardener who thinks that the gardening season starts on Memorial Day and runs until Labor Day. And then we have the gardeners who we start in a couple of months, not even, and we go until the first frost. So what I did was I averaged out what we had last year, and you can see that over a 22-week period, 22 weeks, we had 18 inches of rain. And over a 30-week period, we had 30 inches of rain. So 30 inches of rain over 30 weeks is how many inches per week? And how many inches of water does a plant need? 1. So did we need to water last year?
No.
How many people ran their sprinkler systems?
But wasn't some weeks more rain than
Yep.
weeks with no rain?
That's why you're supposed to monitor. That's why it's your responsibility. You should be paying attention and not just say, oh, gee, my plant is drooping. I think I need to water it. How many people did that last year when their hydrangeas were like this? Come on, put your hands up. You all did it.
So you're not supposed to water?
Remember way back, I said plants optimize photosynthesis at different temperature ranges, right? Some plants are cool season, some plants are warm season. Hydrangea is a warm season plant, but photosynthesis production tops out around 95 degrees, 95 degrees. When the temperature goes up above that, and you're inside the house with the air conditioner running, your hydrangea is out in the yard saying, I can't breathe. And it's drooping. It's not drooping because it needs water. It's drooping because it's just exhausted. It can't do the job. All you got to do is monitor. Look in the morning when you wake up. You'll look at the plants and they'll be upright. They'll be fine. And then at 4 o'clock in the evening, when the temperature begins to drop and it cools off a little bit, they perk right up and you didn't have to do anything. They didn't need water. It was just too hot for them to produce. See, you learned something tonight.
Yes.
It was worth the free trip, right? It was just too hot. But we don't go through that exercise. We just see things and don't go through the Rolodex in our heads. We just assume. So pay attention. Last year, I don't know how many people, but last year I did not water my lawn at all. It never greened out.
So can I ask you a question?
You ask me all you want.
Because I think I overwater, but then on the other hand, I feel like, plants are not going to make it unless I water. I have garden beds, and it's right next to my neighbor's fence, and he has a lot of forsythias.
Yep.
And on a huge pine tree. So at the end of the day, I feel like all those forsythias, he never watered. He passed away, and now his daughter, but she never takes care of it. So
Right.
all of these have overgrown over the last few years. So I always feel at the end of the day that these forsythias are just pulling all their roots are pulling all the nutrients from my flower beds.
That's a good question. She's talking about competition with other plants. And that's one of the observations you need to make. So yes, if you have a competition with other plants, then you have to adjust accordingly, which means in your case you have to give it more water because it is competing. But you also need to consider, like the trees maybe, especially if they're maple trees, get rid of them. Number 1 on the invasive species list in Massachusetts. Norway maple. If you got a Norway maple, cut it down. Turn it into firewood.
Now this is a pine tree.
What's more important, your vegetables or a pine tree?
Yeah, but it's not mine. So
Well, then you have to talk to your neighbor.
it's not mine. If it was mine, I would have got that.
Yeah, you have to have conversations. But yes, if you have competition, that's the reason why plant spacing is so important. When you purchase that thing, that 6-pack, and you get the growing guide or the little growing tag that's in the guide, and it says 12 inches apart, 24 inches apart, then that's what you have to do. You don't plant them closer together in order to squeeze that last tomato plant into the planting bed. You give it to a neighbor or you throw it in the compost pile. She knows what I'm talking about. Otherwise, you have competition. If you have competition, then you have to make adjustments, not just to watering, but also monitoring for insects and disease problems, because now you're creating an environment where that happens.
So how do you water when you plant in pots?
In pots, you have to water a couple of times a day, because in pots, your evaporation rate is a lot greater. So instead of 30% evaporation, you're talking like 80% evaporation. So you're losing a tremendous amount of available water to evaporation. So you need to put more water in. By the way, the other studies on watering, these national surveys and everything, the highest use of water is places like Arizona and Miami, because it's so hot. We water just as much as the people in Miami do, by the way. But they water, use a lot of water in Miami because their evaporation rate is so high in their sandy soils that the only way to grow grass is to constantly water, run the sprinkler system. Which begs my question, why the hell are you growing grass then?
So, question, so if you have raised beds, do you
Yes.
water like you're in the ground, or do you water like you're in a pot? 'Cause we have
If you have raised beds, water like you're in the ground. And the raised beds are actually, is a great way to garden, because that kind of runs in competition with the lasagna garden. It's a great way to garden, is to have raised beds. They heat up a lot quicker in the spring and are more ready for planting and everything. Of course, you still can't plant, because if you put warm season plants in those beds, even though the soil is warm enough, the air temperature is too
I
cold.
was just wondering, because with several feet of soil in the bed, then you're gonna get down to that, would you say, 4 inches, and that, so with the raised beds retain some more of that water?
Yeah, as long as you have organic. You want to get as much organic matter as you can in the soil. Yes?
What is a lasagna bed?
Lasagna bed. Well, she's a presenter, so I'll let her tell you what a lasagna bed is.
Okay, what I do is I layer every year, I don't change. By the way, I'm Jean Anderson, I'm Garden Sense on Facebook, if anybody wants to like my page. It's all about gardening. Okay, I know, I have
Stand up, can you stand up, please?
Yeah, can you stand up and answer the question, please?
All right, so, I presented at a lot of garden clubs and also at Burlington and Boston. And, lasagna gardening, what I do is, I don't till anymore. I just don't like to till anymore. I haven't been for years. And what I do is I just keep layering and layering and layering. I also love salt marsh hay. I purchased it for like $6 a bale now. It's up in, I get it up off of Route 1A, almost to Tender Crop Farms on the right-hand side. It's like a little farm.
Just tell them what lasagna gardening is.
There's all kinds of nutrients. I have a huge compost pile in my vegetable garden. I just throw everything in. And I do a lot of organic cow manure. I do,
And you just layer down the,
all you're doing is layering, you know, lasagna.
Just like you're making lasagna.
Making lasagna.
what's the first layer, like you just got like the salt marsh, and then the
Every year it
manure,
builds up
and
and builds up, because I don't want to disturb the soil because of the nutrients in the soil. I know we all do it differently.
There's no specific this first, that first, that first.
Whatever,
How do you choose your layers and what they consist of?
there's no, for me, I just do it, and I mean, I just salt marsh hay every year, organic cow manure. I don't really have a science to it. I don't really have a specific science to it, and you don't have to. I mean, you can tell, my garden is over 40 years old, my vegetable garden. So I have a lot of built up stuff. I mean, I've have leaves and all kinds of, my husband sometimes will run over the leaves. We have a lot of oak leaves, any leaves, it doesn't matter. Oak leaves, you can do pine needles, you know, anything that you can get in there.
So what you want to do,
How many layers do you do a year?
as many, okay, I'll take it from here.
There's no specific amount of layers.
Rule of thumb.
You just keep.
I got it.
just keep layering.
I got it. I'm the one getting paid tonight.
Yeah, that's right. What are we
Yeah.
doing?
I'm not getting paid.
Thanks, Pete.
Rule of thumb, if your soil right now is just topsoil, or whatever your turn bed is, so now you have soil, the first thing you put on it is something like leaves first, leaves, grass clippings, whatever. Then you would put compost on top of that. Then you might put something else that hasn't broken down yet. It could be cardboard, it could be shredded newspapers. Then you put more soil. But you're putting just layers as if you were making a lasagna. And as long as you keep alternating, then you're mixing the microbes in amongst the stuff that has not decomposed, and the microbes will break those down for you.
So you should have like an organic thing that's really broken down, like every other layer.
Right, you should have something every other layer so that it will work on the stuff that has not broken down. Somebody had a question back there.
What time of year are you doing this?
In the fall, when you're doing the fall cleanup, so that they spend the rest of the fall, slows down in the winter, kicks up again in the spring before you start growing, and then again, take everything else that you have, set it aside, but while your plant is growing, you could use as a mulch some of what you're saving. As long as it's not green, you can use some of what you have that you've been saving as mulch. Yes?
So, I'll fess up. I have just gardens, flower gardens. The only layers I put down is like pine bark mulch around them.
Right, which is perfect, that's fine.
That's it?
Yep, that's fine.
Oh, okay.
That's fine. However, caveat, when you dig up your flowers, your daylilies, your dahlias, your irises rather, when you have to dig them up because they're overgrown and time to divide, that's the time for you to put down manure and compost, work that into the soil before you replant. But yeah, the mulch itself on top is perfect, that's fine. Matter of fact, turn that mulch in. When you dig the plants up, turn that in along with your compost and manures. Then plant and then put new mulch around it.
What about the ink in newspapers?
The ink in newspapers, there's a lot. I'm going to go off. This is the conservative, no. Industry pays attention to public comments. They know what's going on. Okay? So they were aware for years about the complaints of ink being a problem in the compost. They switched over to vegetable-based inks like decades ago. So while people were still complaining about it being a problem, they had already gotten off using it. I had a big argument in Newton with a person who got mad when I recommended using dishwasher detergent as a wetting agent whenever you're using fertilizers, pesticides, or whatever. And she was screaming at me, "That's full of phosphates, and phosphates are killing the oceans and the streams and everything." And I'm holding this up and saying, "Buddy, only a little bit, only a little bit." And finally, I'm looking real close. It says phosphate free. I'm like, so industry is always, as much as we want to complain, industry has always been ahead of the curve. The reality is, when you're talking about abuses and everything, it's the homeowner that does that. Yes?
So could you use, say for instance, papers that you would put through the shredder, or is that not a good?
Papers through the shredder. So you're talking like your financial records so nobody can see how rich you are? Yes. Yeah, you can do that. Okay? So let's skip now to fertilizer. So knowing that you don't have to waste a ton of water and everything else, why would you even bother using fertilizer? My first question, how many people have a lawn care company? Take care of their lawn. How many? Keep your hands up. Don't be embarrassed. Put your hands up. How many of you received a copy of the records of what they put on your lawn for fertilizers? How many of you have a copy of what they used? So how many of you maintain that record at home? Okay, how many people take care of their own lawns? How many of you kept a record of what you put? Entire room, how many people who put chemicals on their lawns did a soil analysis before they did anything?
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
How many garden club members remember a year and a half ago we had a speaker come in and talked about Massachusetts General Laws 330, Section 31.
Yeah, I remember.
Plant nutrient application requirement for agricultural land and non-agricultural turf and lawns. You are responsible, if you are going to put any fertilizer on your lawn, to first do a soil analysis, and then when you put it on the lawn, maintain records of what you put on your lawn. Failure to do so is a fine of $250. Secondary fine, $500. Third fine, $1,000. And it's sequential. For every day you don't maintain the records or produce the record, the fine grows.
Who are they trying to get in that?
What they're trying to get is us to stop using so much fertilizer in our lawns.
It's not necessary.
Peter, try to stay in the shop.
Oh, come on, Phil. So what they're trying to do is get us to reduce the consumption of fertilizer. The other irony is they took the phosphate out of the fertilizer because phosphates don't break down. They just don't break down. You only need a little bit of phosphate, and whatever you put down 10 years ago is probably still in the ground now. So they remove phosphate, just like they did out of the dish detergent, they remove phosphate from our fertilizer. So when you buy fertilizer now, instead of the NPK always having a number there, this middle number is 0. So it's 6, in this case it would be 607. So how many of you, the last couple of years, noticed the price of your bag of fertilizer went down because it had no phosphate in it? So why would you do that? You didn't bother wasting fertilizer on your lawn. Well, according to the University of Florida Agricultural Extension Survey, National Survey, 20% of homeowners do not know the species of turf grass they have in their lawn. Approximately 77% of them used an herbicide in their lawns last year. 92% perceive that improving the property value is directly related to having a nice green lawn. But they all agree that there is a concern that excess lawn and landscape fertilizer and pesticides can have a negative environmental impact. Yes, Phil?
What do you think of Maloganite?
Maloganite?
Maloganite, do you use it at all?
I don't use anything.
What is it?
I don't have a clue. It's a organic.
Milwaukee sewer.
So
Processing sewage.
so that would be the same as what comes out of the MWRA.
A little better.
But it's a little better because they probably took the heavy metals out of it in the process.
It's an alternative to organic, supposedly, it's human waste.
So it's organic.
It's considered organic in farmers and all that. My father used to always put it on our lawn a long time ago. I have put it on my lawn, but if you don't need a lot of fertilizer or anything. I don't use much at all myself. But yeah, Maloganite is just basically human waste.
Which means it's organic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I actually have another book at home, 1852, where they did a study of all of the human waste coming out of the major cities to be used out on the farms. They actually researched which city has the better people manure. So there's actually nothing wrong with that, and we actually, way back when Phil and I were on the Recreation Commission, we looked at the MWRA about grabbing some of that pellets that they were producing, but we decided to walk away because we were concerned about there still being some heavy metals and everything in there. There was a time in this country when we didn't worry about that in our storage system, storage waste. But with all of the products now, hair cleaning, soaps, and all of that other stuff, there's so much stuff that goes into the system that we can't take the chance with using that on our vegetable gardens. But it's organic. Organic is organic. Okay? You've seen this before. All of the elements needed to have a healthy plant. You have this little chart in your handout. These are all the elements needed for a healthy plant. Let me turn it right side up. That's better.
Yeah.
Hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon represent 96% of a plant's nutritional needs. 96%. Where do the plants get hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen from? Air and water. 96% of a plant's nutritional needs. Like less than 2% is your macronutrient, NPK. So I would argue that if you put a lot of organic material into your soil and feed the microbes who are going to break down that organic material into the individual elements that a plant needs to grow, then you don't need a lot of fertilizer. May need some. It's up to you. If you want 45 tomatoes on your tomato plant versus 40, then you put a little fertilizer in. If you can live with 40 tomatoes on your tomato plant, then don't bother with the fertilizer. Simple as that. If you want to make your own organic fertilizer, this is your coffee, beans. You have this recipe in your handout. Touch it, feel it, move it around, not going to kill you. Can I go back to watering for 1 second? You have in your handout, further back, and we'll get to it a little bit later, you have a multiplier. This is the formula for calculating how much water you need for 1 inch per week. You don't have this formula in your handout. I simplified it for you because I didn't think you wanted to play with all these numbers. But essentially what I did is I took the number of square feet. You need to go out and know what you're working with. Whether it's your lawn or it's a flower bed or a vegetable bed, know how many square feet that is. Once you know how many square feet that is, you can calculate by volume what 1 inch of water is. So in a square foot of soil, 1 inch of water is 144 cubic inches. You multiply that times the number of square feet, divide it by 231, which is the number of cubic inches in a gallon. That tells you how many gallons of water you need in that bed to give you 1 inch of water. Burlington got faucets, spigots outdoors, pump out about 8 gallons of water per minute. I derated it to 5. So you divide that total amount of gallons by 5 gallons per minute, and that tells you how many minutes you have to keep the sprinkler running. That's really hard, huh? That's why I simplified it for you.
You did?
I did. Further back, the number's there. But here's the other thing. We already know that we got last year 3/4 of an inch of water per week. So you just need to divide that number of minutes by 4. So instead of an hour, you just need to run the sprinkler system for 15 minutes. That gives you 1 inch of water per week. Easy peasy. If you measure. Get out there with a ruler and measure, don't eyeball. Know your yard, be your yard. Who just said something?
Tuna fish canned.
No, that's how much rainfall. You can find that out just by going online or reading the newspaper every day. Or you mean run the sprinkler until you get the 1/4 inch? Yeah, you can do that too. Or you can just say, I'll be back in 15 minutes and shut it off.
Or put it on a timer.
Is it better to water in the morning or like?
What's the best time to water?
Before the sun, I would say.
You want to water before it gets too hot or before the sun sets. You don't want a plant to go to bed wet. Just like you don't put a baby to bed with a wet diaper, you don't want plants to go to bed wet. So around 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock during the summer, you water that's fine. But I like to do it in the evening because it lets the water percolate a little bit and get absorbed by the organic material. If you want to water in the morning, that's good too. But you should try to not water after 9 o'clock, which is easy in Burlington because the watering restriction prevents us from running after 9 o'clock. But try to do it as early in the morning as you can for the same reason, so as much percolates into the soil and gets absorbed by all the organic matter before the sun rises and you start losing it to evaporation. Okay? Yes?
I just have a quick question about the mulch. So what if you took up all your mulch and you put this really nice stone? Are you screwing yourself? Are you-
Stone?
Yeah, we put like nice stone that looks like mulch because it was, the runoff was crazy, like we were losing all our mulch. But the plants seem to be doing fine, so I guess it's fine, but.
Well, you're not getting any absorption. You're not getting any breakdown of the mulch to feed the nutrients and the microbes in the soil. You're not being green because the mulch is sequestering carbon in the soil. So by you putting mulch down, you're becoming a carbon sequester.
I mean, they're huge hostas, like the giant hostas standing around the base of them.
Yep.
The runoff on the street is just, the mulch was just going down the street.
Have you considered raising so you don't have runoff? Terracing your beds so you don't have runoff?
We have like this huge wall that comes down, so that makes it, let's just put this nice red stone and
Right.
it's not jammed up against all the bushes like this.
So you're not getting any runoff, or you're getting runoff? It's
No,
just the
it's-
stone's not running off.
Yeah, I mean, things are growing fine.
But the water's still running out.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
it's getting somewhere.
What you do is you raise the beds, you make them more level so you get reduced runoff. Did it make you happy to do that?
It looks lovely.
Are you happy?
Yes, that's great.
That's all that matters.
But we have mulch all around the house.
Okay. No, that's better. Anything that gets rid of grass is great. If you're not happy gardening, you're not going to do any of what we're talking about. Simple as that. If you're not happy, you're not going to do any of what we're talking about. That's part. Go all the way back to the first page. We get tired during the course of the growing season, and by the end of the summer, we're done. So when everything dies, we don't even bother going out to clean the yard. I'll do it in the spring. That's the worst thing you can do. But you're so worn out, you leave it till the spring. Well, that's creating a terrible environment for insects and diseases in your yard. And then in the spring, come Memorial Day, when everybody goes out, 3 days, this is it. Like, somebody fired the gun. We go out on Saturday, and we try to do it all in one day, because Sunday and Monday, got to go to the parties. Nobody goes to cemeteries anymore. Got to go to the parties. So those 3 days really aren't 3 days. It's just Saturday. And we kill ourselves. We throw our backs out. We go to the parties on Sunday and Monday and say, give me a beer. I killed myself yesterday. If we took the time in the fall to clean up, we wouldn't have that in the spring. And then come the following fall, we would be feeling a little bit better and getting more things done. So I think that's problems gardeners make number 7 or something on the list of problems. But let's talk a little bit about pesticides, because you guys are probably ready to go home. Grandparents. This is all they used to, this is good, by the way. I washed these like a dozen times, so there's nothing in here. So I'm not spraying anybody. Right? Our grandparents probably had these. Right?
That's the Godfather.
This is more for like the indoor house plants and everything. This is the one I grew up with. This is a quart container. This is what I grew up with. So what did we do 50, 60 years ago?
Put DDT in it.
Well, the chlorothane for me. For me, it was chlorothane. We won't even get into that. What we used to do was we would mix powder, right? The pesticide was in powdered form. We'd fill it, not even in here, we would do it in a separate container, according to directions, mix it all up, pour it through a sieve to get rid of all the big chunks and solids, then put it into this because you didn't want to clog the nozzle. So you had 1, 2, 3 containers to clean up afterwards, and you only had a quart. So you didn't use a lot of pesticides 50, 60 years ago, because with that quart, there was no way I was going to mix another batch. I don't care what my father told me. So it'd be, yeah, Dad, I did the whole yard. But that's not the way it is today. Today you have something like this. So this same quart, you fill up, and it's the equivalent of 15 gallons. Right? 15 gallons. What's that, 15 times 4? 60? That's 60 of these to do the same yard. That's pesticide abuse. That's what I'm talking about. The industry has made it so easy for us to abuse things, it's become ridiculous.
Because they make more money.
That's part of it. That's a big part of it.
It's a big part.
They make it easier. By the way, this is my favorite one, because they engraved my name on it. That's a big part of it.
I know.
You know, they want to sell. Part of the Florida study on lawn care was just that, teaching the industry how to market their products so that we would use more of it. That's just the way it is. We need to get off this spiral. We need to get off the spiral. In 2008, I think, my first time I spoke to the Burlington Garden Club, and this chart was used. It didn't have the third column. It was only 2 columns. And the driving point of this chart is that organic pesticides versus chemical made in a factory pesticide, which contains mainly organic materials in their pesticide, there's no difference when it comes to the precautions you need to make when you use a pesticide. There's no difference. You have to wear the same protective gear. You have to make sure you're not spraying when it's windy outside. You need to make sure it's not raining. Just on and on and on. Bottom line, as far as the insects and bugs are concerned, they're dead. They don't go to heaven and Valhalla and say, yeah, but she used organic pesticide. It's not. They're dead. Dead is dead.
That is dead. That's what my father used to say, gone is gone.
Now, how many of you have used in the past a pesticide, even if you wore PPE, which I know you didn't, so you didn't have any mask or anything on, don't lie to me. How many of you, like, after you were done and you cleaned up, were maybe a little lightheaded, all right, or maybe a little queasy? Yeah, I can see, no, not me. No, I don't do that. I know you do. Because you used this stuff and it made you sick. Now you, in my case, 224 pounds. If I get sick and I'm 224 pounds, what do you think this pesticide that I'm using to get rid of Japanese beetles is doing to the microbes? You think they're dying? Or do you think, well, no, he's spraying for Japanese beetles, it's not going to affect me. You know, there's a reason why your lawn service puts those yellow flags down and tells you don't have your little kids, your small pets running around the lawn for 2 weeks. Going to make, if it makes you nauseous, going to make them do other things. All right? So you really do want to cut back. Now, pesticides, because, as you suggested, they've gotten even better. Pesticides work 2 ways. They're either a surfactant that goes on your plant so that when an insect or bug eats the plant, they die, they get sick and die. Or contact, so even if you just sprayed them, if they come into contact with the poison, they die. The other one is systemic, which is you spray the plant, but it goes into the plant. So it becomes part of the plant itself. It's a systemic pesticide so that when you eat the plant, you die. So what this group did, this is not Bayer, right? This is the Bayer product. It's the one that comes in the blue bottle. What they did was they put both in. They just took all of this stuff and said, we'll just put it all in one. So you can just use this and it'll kill everything. But, including everything. Now here, again, here's the thing. A healthy plant has its own pesticides and poisons in it. A healthy plant chemically tells other plants, I'm under attack. Turn on your defense system mechanisms. When you cut the grass in the summer, you get that nice, fresh cut watermelon. Oh man, the lawn smells great. That's the grass plants saying to the other grass plants, I'm under attack. Somebody's chopping me up. That's not the grass saying, oh, look, they gave us a crew cut. This is awesome. No, they're killing us. They're killing us. That's the release that's going on. It is, plants are capable of doing that. And those chemicals, those poisons, don't leave the plant until the fruit is ready to harvest. That's why you do not eat a green apple. That's why a green apple makes you sick. That's why if you eat a green pepper, you're burping all day after that versus waiting for that pepper to ripen to red or orange or yellow, in which case it's nice and sweet. Sidebar, history. American Revolution. The British are coming down from Quebec, marching down to Albany, heading down to Albany. Where were we back then? We weren't the Americans, we were the what? Colonists. Oh, we got wind of it. So Washington sent a group up from New York, go fight the British, stop that movement down the Hudson River. They met and they fought at Rensselaer. On the way up, the colonists were starving. So before they got to Rensselaer, which is just east of New York, of Albany, they went past a cornfield and they picked all this green corn and they ate it on the way up to the battlefield. And by the time they got to the battlefield, they were running in more ways than one. True story. True story. So the plants are capable of taking care of themselves. We just need to help them. Okay, now I gave you a lot of tips and tricks and everything. So if you are mulching and you want to mulch because it suppresses weed growth, it helps retain water in the soil, it reduces evaporation, breaks down eventually and feeds the plants. It modulates the temperature of the soil. So there's a lot of great things. But how much do I put down? This is where you need to figure out how many square feet you're trying to cover. And this is where this comes in again. So if you're putting 3 inches of mulch down, 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 inches of mulch will cover 4 square feet. If you're putting 4 inches down, which you know that's too much, but 1, 2, 3. So 4 inches of mulch will cover 4 square feet. There are 27 square feet in a yard. So if you know how many cubic feet, 27 cubic feet in a yard, so if you know how many cubic feet of mulch you need, divide that by 27, that's how many yards you need to water. So I gave you calculations for both a 2 cubic foot bag, which how they sell them a lot now, or by the yard. You have that chart. That's what this chart is. In order to conserve water, the best things you can do is level your planting beds. So if you're sloping, if your land sloped, at least your planting beds you should try to level. Can't do much about your lawn, But at least in your planting beds, you should try to make as level as possible so whatever water makes contact with the soil will percolate in and not run off, reduces runoff. If you have the yard going out, just runs out into the street and there's no berm or anything to prevent the water from going into the street, you should try to build up a berm along your property line so that the water doesn't run off into the street, because it's only going to go into the storm drain and out into the Atlantic Ocean. It's better for you to have it percolate where it is and go down into the aquifer, which is what we need. So all kinds of information linked along. I took an entire side of my yard about this big, where I got fed up after 40 years of trying to grow grass, and I got rid of it. A lot of you have been to the yard, right? It's all mulches and planting beds, right? I figure it saved me about 20 minutes a week of mowing. So multiply that by how many weeks, so that's how many hours I saved. On the next page at the top, optimized watering, 12 minutes per 100 square feet at 5 gallons per minute. So that's 1 inch of water per week. So figure out how many square feet you have, how many 100 square feet you have, multiply it times 12, and that's how many minutes you need to run it. D-rate it 75% because we get about 3/4 of an inch of water per week. See, yes?
But I use weed hoses.
Okay.
Sprinkler system. So, the water,
Look up on the drip system or the weep system. Look how much water it distributes per minute. There should be some kind of flow rate in there somewhere, and just do the calculation off of that. So instead of 5 minutes, it might be something else. Do the math that way. Feels good spray is just that. Some people like to use fertilizer. They like to use the water-based fertilizer. If you're going to do that, any kind of spraying, you should use a liquid dish detergent. The Feels Good spray is just this liquid dish detergent with ammonia. The ammonia is a fungicide. So all I'm doing is giving the plants a shower. I'm not trying to kill anything. I'm just trying to keep them healthy by getting the dust and off the leaves and stuff, so I'm giving it a shower. I'm using soap and ammonia. That's all. But when it's 90 degrees outside and you're out spraying with that, and it feels good. Afterwards. Rhodey, give me a break. Yes?
Water a cup of that in a gallon of water?
Yep, you don't need a lot. Use like a tablespoon per a little quart bottle, so you don't use a lot. But it doesn't matter. This breaks this attraction. That dish detergent, this attraction, it breaks it. So it breaks that magnetic bond. So what happens when you use that, you know how when you first water a dry area, the water runs off until eventually some of the soil gets wet and then the water begins to percolate in. And you also notice it gets that like a tunnel, all the soil goes around that, all that organic. That's this. The water molecules are sticking to each other, and the first few take off, and the rest say, okay, I'm following. That's the magnetic attraction. It all takes off. So what the dish detergent does is break that bond. Okay? It's in there. Your quantities are in there. I gave you all the facts. It's all in here. That's why the title, just the facts. Just got to read all of this. So I think everything else is there, and I think we already ran over the hour. Questions?
When you are planting annuals, is it different from, say, the perennials? I mean, if I plant hydrangea and it can withstand a bit of drought because it's got deep roots, what about that little annual flower?
You need just amend the soil before you plant. That's the whole secret. Get as much organic material into the soil as possible. You already know from the 1918 2 wheelbarrowfuls. Just get as much as you can into the soil, worked into the soil before you plant. That's the whole secret. Do the work up front. If you do the work up front, the rest of the summer goes easily. Yes? Guy behind you, Dan.
How do you organically fertilize a lawn?
Compost. Tom Selleck in Magnum PI used to take shovelfuls of cow manure. Remember that? Remember that scenes? Just to throw from the, spread the cow manure. Mulch. Use a mulching mower. But make sure, if you're going to use a mulching mower, make sure you cut a couple of times a week. You don't want to have the blades be too big. But use a mulching mower. And over time, all of that stuff will eventually build up. And hopefully you'll get enough in so that you're staying ahead of the plants eating all of that organic, or the microbes eating all that organic stuff. But you just keep working it in, working it in, and working it in.
Does that then mean you have to aerate it after a certain amount of time?
Well, you should, depending on if you bag or mulch, you should thatch your lawn on a regular basis. You don't necessarily have to aerate. The only places you do have to aerate are the areas where you're constantly walking. Where you see the grass dying, you're creating these paths of dead grass because that's where you constantly walk. You're pressing the oxygen out of the air and you're suffocating the microbes and the roots that need oxygen to breathe. That's where you need to aerate. But the rest of the lawn should be fine. But thatching is important. Yes?
So if I wanted to aerate my lawn, because my landscaper said, you need to aerate your lawn, is there a rolling thing that?
Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of things. But if you've never aerated the lawn, you have to know what you're dealing with to begin with. You need to do a soil analysis. You need to dig up some soil. Is it a clay soil? Is it a sandy soil? If it's a clay soil, you can plug that all day long to try to aerate it, but it's going, because of the clay, there's not a lot of air pockets, and it's just going to. So you need, if it's sandy soil, then there's really no need to aerate. If it's a sandy soil, you just need to thatch it, and you should be okay. If it's sandy. If it's something in between, you need to know that. Yes?
On your animal repellent, how often do you have to reapply? Because we have a hellacious problem with rabbits.
Okay, first of all, if you get rabbits, you should just put up a fence.
We do a fence.
Okay.
The babies come out of the fence.
Yep.
And they eat the bottom of the plants and the plants fall over.
Yeah, well, that's part of in the very beginning, phase one, about, underestimating the wildlife. You need to go down about 6 inches with the chicken wire or with a piece of wood or something so they can't dig under the fence. A physical barrier, especially with rabbits, is better. Here's the thing with repellents. There are two types of repellents. There's the predator animal repellent. That's your wolf manure and your coyote manure and all of that stuff. That's the don't come in my yard, I'm going to eat you repellent. Yeah. And then there's the one you have there, which is I don't taste good repellent. I'm going to make you sick.
We've tried that.
But the reality is, if the animals are hungry, they're going to eat.
Yeah, we have a large population.
So my rabbits are already in the backyard banging on the window, like, when are you going to stop feeding us? I mean, they're terrible. I got rabbit footprints all over the backyard. They're like, come on, throw some cabbage or something out here, will you? So you need the fence. They're terrible. One year they sat right next to me while I was fixing the fence. They came out of the sat beside me watching me fix the fence. I'm like, really?
Related to our rabbits.
They probably are.
Hey, we're gonna move.
Yes?
Watering with a hose versus the sprinkler.
A hose versus sprinkler? So in the standing like this versus having a sprinkler running, a sprinkler is a lot easier.
Other than that, watering with a hose makes the soil.
Oh, what do you mean if you put on the shower head, you're not going to compact the soil. But if you're going to use a hose, it brings a good point up. The plants tell you, just by the shape of the leaves and everything, the plants will tell you water close to the crown of the plant or water out by the drip line, just by looking at the leaves. So for instance, plants like daylilies that have a crown right in the middle and all of the tubers are right in the middle of the plant, all the leaves go straight down and are V'd to the center of the plant. So the water, when it rains, gets funneled right to the base of the plant. But then you have plants like tomatoes that the leaves slope out. So all the feeder roots are at the perimeter of the tomato. So you don't water the base of the tomato, you water around the perimeter. So if you're going to use a garden hose, be the plant. Recognize what you're watering. Observe And the plant will tell you where to put the water. Danny, did you have a question?
Yeah,
He got it? Yeah.
How do you feel about neem oil?
Neem? I have no,
I mean, does it fit into one of the categories? Is it
Yep.
okay to use, not okay?
nothing is bad. I'm not saying don't use chemicals. All right? This isn't empty because I bought it this way. I have a bottle of that Bear pesticide, just as big. I bought it 7 years ago and I still have this much left in the container. I bought it because I have Oriental and Asiatic lilies, and I have red lily leaf beetles. But I like Oriental and Asiatic lilies. But I only use the insecticide on my Asiatic and Oriental lilies, so I only use this much every year. And just spray them. Because I have red lily leaf beetles on my lilies doesn't mean I have to go spray my peonies. So I don't, no way I'm picking them off.
I pick them off all the time.
A lot of people do. Last year I didn't have any red lily leaf beetles. I didn't use any pesticide at all last year. So I'm hoping they either found a predator or they decided to move back to Canada.
Yeah, because in the last 3 years, I've been good with them.
Yeah, exactly. So neem, use it. I'm just saying, just don't abuse it. Use, don't abuse. Robin, did you have a question? No?
This animal repellent, is that good for, sounds like it's good for rabbits, but what about deer?
No, deer, whole new ball of wax. The only thing that's going to stop a deer is a 5-foot fence. Yeah, well, 2 5-foot fences. Used to be 2 4-foot fences 3 feet apart. Now 5 foot. One of my daughters lives in Manassas, Virginia, and all those vegetable gardens are literally 8 feet and across the top. It's like it's a cage. Their gardens are a cage because of the deer. They have no choice. Yep.
My next door neighbor's front lawn has, by her house has rhododendrons and azalea, and they've been getting the black sooty mold.
Right.
I told her to flush it with detergent and,
Yep.
I don't know what else to put.
Well, part of it is they're probably letting the leaves that are mold with the black. Well, first of all, black mold is black mold, black spot, right?
No, it's like just.
Around the whole, yeah, okay. They're letting those fall to the ground and they're not cleaning up underneath. So the first thing they need to do is rake up everything that's underneath. We'll clean it all up, then use your detergent spray and everything, then put down fresh fresh mulch. Take all of that, throw it in the compost pile, because you want the 30,000 to 1 good guys to beat up that bad guy so that you can use that compost elsewhere in the garden.
Peter, neem is from the Indian nut tree, so it's basically a nut. It's the next best thing to organics. And,
Well, it is organic. You keep saying next best, they're all organic.
well, not everything, but
If it's
it's the Indian nut tree, so it's safe, but my grandfather used to use it on his fruit trees, but you have to put it on just before they start to bloom. And because I used to have apple trees too in my yard, I used to put it on just before it started to bloom.
Well, that brings up a good point, by the way.
Fine mist, right?
That's because you don't want to kill the buds, and that brings up a good point. If you've walked around town recently, January has been so warm that the buds have started to swell up. So if we get some killing frosts, they're going to die. So you're going to see a lot of winter kill. And that's what I was talking about, the way at the very beginning, the 2 different temperatures. This is the shoot temperature. So the plant is thinking, done. All right, one more question.
In my town, we have what we call the pit, where you can bring all of your leaves and your branches and stuff like that, and they turn it over for compost.
Right.
My concern always is, you don't know who's bringing what down there.
Yep.
So that compost, I don't trust it because who knows what kinds of diseases or insects or anything in there. What's your experience with those kinds of
I know,
composting?
are you in Lexington or?
No, I'm in Wakefield.
Okay, in Lexington, they track everything that comes in. They're constantly doing samples, and if they find something like that, it's usually early enough that they can find either by video or by paperwork that's in with that stuff, and they actually call the owners, tell them to come and get it.
Yeah, but in my town, they don't track that. You just go in, you show them that you're.
Well, they check though. You should ask if they at least check.
No, they don't.
They don't check, they just accept everything?
I won't use it
I
because
don't
I found
use it.
oil deposits in it. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Well, then that's a whole different thing. That's between you and your board of selectmen and everything else. Okay, I guess that's it. Whatever time it is, what is it, 8:20?